Hello, welcome along. It's a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week, we're chatting to the author of what many people are already calling one of the books of the year. Abigail Dean has just published her debut, Girl A. If you're across books online, I reckon you'll have heard of it. Today she tells us how she planned her day to get it down. Also how she brings a completely new method of taking her work with her, something that we have never heard before. You can find out what she does to help her pick the story up the next day and what she needs before she starts work.
I like to have a very vague plan, and the way that I do that, to be really kind of specific, is in a document form. I will just set out maybe 2 or 3 pages of what I think will happen, almost in kind of bullet point, very unromantic form. And then I essentially populate that plan with the novel.
More with Abigail Dean in this week's Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along. It's Writer's Routine, the show where we take a look inside an author's day. My name's Dan Simpson. Thank you for finding us. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for downloading, streaming. Thank you for telling your friends. Exciting news. This month we are supported by the fantastic people over at Faber Academy who are giving you money off of their courses. You might have heard about Faber Academy before. Successful published authors who have been on this show have used its fantastic resources and been there themselves. Faber Academy is a creative writing school set up as part of the publishing house Faber. Now, it's been going just over 12 years, and many of its alumni have secured major publishing deals on the back of their work from graduating. S.J. Watson, Alice Feeney, Gail Honeyman, to name just a few. There are loads more authors who have used Faber Academy. They cover so much to improve you as a writer, to make you better. They run fiction, memoir, poetry courses for all levels and across different times as well to suit you. Like if you're just getting started and maybe you're finding little moments to write at night after the day job and regular life and you can't spare much time, Faber Academy has got something for you. You can sign up for the one-day beginner's workshop. If you're a little bit further down the line, they've got 6-month advanced courses as well, and there's everything in between. Now, at the moment, all of the courses are online. When it's safe to do so, though, they'll offer in-person classes at their London Faber offices. Now, they want to treat you like a proper Faber published author and to help you get there with support, an encouraging environment for writers, all taught by experienced tutors and visiting industry experts as well. Now, if you're a little bit further along and you've got to grips with the basics and you've got your first draft done, but you might think it needs a little bit of tweaking here and there, or you want a supportive professional eye to comb through it, Faber Academy also runs a fantastic manuscript assessment service. Professional industry readers giving editorial feedback on your work. It might be nice and simple. They might just nudge you in the right direction. They might give you a full-on review of the thing, or some tips on just tightening it up before you send it off to agents. So when it lands on a publisher's desk, kind of half their job has already been done. Now, you right now, listening to this show, you can save money on any online Faber Academy course or manuscript assessment. Use the code WritersRoutine21, all in caps, at the checkout to get a 10% discount over at faberacademy.co.uk. And you've got a little while to make the most of this. It runs all the way through till September. So you've got some time just to think it over. Look through what they do at faberacademy.co.uk, and then when you're ready for a little bit of help from industry professionals at an actual publishing house, use the code and save yourself money. Writers Routine 21 at the checkout. Use that code, get a 10% discount on all online Faber Academy courses and manuscript assessments over at faberacademy.co.uk. Now, this week we're chatting to Abigail Dean. Her debut novel is Girl A, and it's absolutely rocking the book world at the moment. It's one of the biggest debuts in a while. You know, when you've heard so much about a book before it's even out? That is Girl A. It's an instant Sunday Times bestseller. It's all about Lex, brought up in a house of horrors, trying to fix things and turn it into a house of good with her sister Evie. Now, we talk about how Abigail balances a full-time job with writing a debut. Also, how she thought through the idea and figured out her plan. And I'm really interested to find out, how does it feel having the dreams of the most incredibly successful debut ever, and like when that actually starts to come through, what's that like? I had to ask Abigail that question, so that's on the way. We also go deep on her writer's routine as well, because that's the point of the show, and we get into it as we always do with what Abigail Dean sees around her in the place where she sits down to write.
So this has changed quite a lot recently, because I've recently moved house, but my desk has stayed the same, so I can sort of start with that. I have a kind of big sort of old wooden desk, and it is usually crowded with books as well, but not my own books. I should make very clear. I usually have to hand a sort of stack of novels that are often kind of poetry as well, that relate to what I'm writing at that current time, that I turn to if I'm struggling with writing. So I have a sort of stack of novels, and I also have a small model of Manchester that is my hometown. And I have a few plants that are struggling over the winter. I think is what I would say.
So that's on your desk. What about like a laptop or a big computer? What are you writing on there?
I write on a laptop. And it's the same laptop I've had for a number of years now, and fortunately hasn't yet given up the ghost. But I tend to write on Google Docs with my stuff saved in the cloud, because I'm an incredibly paranoid laptop user. I've been burnt in the past before, as I'm sure many writers have been. So that's kind of those are the tools that I use for writing.
I tell you what, I've done chat to like 150 authors doing this now, and no one has ever written straight into the cloud. As in, they write it and save it, but no one's ever written straight to Google Drive.
Well, it's this awful thing as well, because I think, because I work for Google, people are like, are you just promoting Google Docs? And I'm like, no, I genuinely do. I genuinely do write on Google Docs. I promise that is the case.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I was just about to say, aren't you wary of the people at Google kind of snooping in what you're writing and stealing everything? But I mean, you are the people at Google. So.
Yeah, exactly. So fewer concerns.
Yeah. So listen, so that's your desk. That's what you're writing on. Take me around the room. Is there much inspiration there? Is there artwork? Is there something that kind of keeps you going?
So at present, there is very little artwork, and that's a result of the recent move. I'm sort of gathering a few pictures, that are being delivered and that will at some point be framed. And often, the art I like is really sort of strange, surreal art. So I've got a Dali picture that is coming. I have a very eerie clock that has a snake on it. That's the first thing that I bought for my office. So I think the general vibe that I'm going for is scare children. Like, I mean, they're not going to want to just come in here. And I mean, I guess what I would say is, in my old office, that was also our kind of second bedroom and spare room. So I tended there to be surrounded by a clothes maiden and my husband's work items and a kind of spare bed and usually a cat demanding some attention. So it's quite novel to have a bit more space.
Well, this is interesting about the new office, the new room, because you've just moved. Now, I don't want to count chickens before they've hatched, and maybe this is not something that you are keen to do. Maybe you want to carry on, working and spending your time. But with the immense success of Girl A, there might be a time in the future where you are simply a full-time writer, and you've got the opportunity now to kit out your office for just that creative endeavor in mind. What else do you kind of want around you that will help you tap into those words?
I think that definitely pictures and books are the two things that I really like to have to hand. So I do also have a bookshelf in here that is kind of the bookshelf that I go to feed into the pile of books on my desk. And I'm also a bit of a sucker for really nice lighting as well, for mood lighting, essentially. So I have kind of a kind of really beautiful sort of brass desk lamp, and a corner lamp has just arrived, so I can kind of work at dimming the room, depending on the scene, perhaps.
If I were to walk into your writing space, Abigail, would I have any clue as to the story that you're telling that day? Would I see post-it notes, any research materials anywhere?
No, I think that the only clues would potentially be in the nature of the books on my desk. I try to sort of, if I'm writing a particular scene, even a particular kind of conversation, I often will read parts of books that have a sort of similar sense to it. And I'm not entirely sure what I know what I mean by that. I guess it's the case that if you're writing an incredibly sort of tense action scene, that there will be certain books and certain scenes that I've read that have made me incredibly on edge. That feeling that I had to read. I wanted to skip ahead 2 pages to make sure the characters were okay. So those are the scenes that I'll kind of go back to and look at and kind of, in a way, I guess, study to see how a particular writer elicited that emotion. So I think those would be the small clues, perhaps, in the pile of books on my desk.
With that, it must have been a little while ago now when you were initially writing Girl A, so you might not be able to remember. But can you recall any of the authors that were, touchstones there, that when you did need a little bit of help and inspiration with the tense words, people that you called on?
Yes, yeah. There are a few that I definitely kind of remember going back to time and again. So one was The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And I think that the things that I was kind of focusing on then in rereading parts of that novel were really the combination of it. It's incredibly bleak landscape that the characters, the father and son travel through in The Road. It's very kind of apocalyptic. It's sort of cold, damp, unpleasant atmosphere. But the thing that I remember about the book is just how beautiful the relationship is between those main characters. And that's something I was thinking about a lot for Girl A. The sort of the tender moments and the sort of very normal day-to-day sibling dialogue that appears even though the Gracie children are in a really difficult, awful circumstance. So that was definitely a book that I looked to a lot. And another writer whose books I just kind of gather around me just in general is Kazuo Shigeru. And his narrators are kind of often incredibly reserved, and they say a great deal in what they emit, and in their sort of tangents. And that was something that in developing Lexi's character, I was thinking a lot. She is in a way a very reserved narrator, but in another way a narrator who feels things very deeply. So I was sort of surrounded by Ishiguro's work as well. So I am an awful early morning person. So I'm sure that have been some writers on this podcast who have said, I'm up at 6 a.m. and I'm writing. So I actually am a relatively early riser, but I am not an early writer. So I usually go for a run. I'm quite a big runner in the mornings, and have an incredibly leisurely breakfast, and start writing at maybe kind of 10 or 11 a.m. And I will try to do a few hours in the morning. But my sort of favorite period of time to write is likely to be kind of 4 or 5 p.m. Into the evening, into sort of like 8 or 9. I something about that time. It coincides actually with the exact pattern that I'm most productive at work day to day as well, which is not a particularly sociable time to want to write. But I just, I've always kind of enjoyed that time of day. And in the last sort of hour of writing, I might go and get a glass of wine or gin and tonic and sort of wrap up the day before dinner. That's probably how a good day would look.
So when you start your work, when you start your writing later on in the day, how do you know what the plan is for that day? How do you know what you're writing next?
I write in a relatively linear fashion. So I guess I kind of know by what was last written at the end of the day before. There are some exceptions to that if I'm really stuck with a particular scene, but for the most part, I try to pick up where I left off. I think that it can be slightly torturous. I think one way to sort of combat that is that I do try not to leave writing or characters sort of in a muddle. I try to have something kind of to look forward to writing at the beginning of the next day, rather than dreading returning to the desk, which I think is sort of becomes a curse in itself.
What kind of things are you looking forward to? I can't remember who it was. It might have been someone like Philip Pullman. I once read that he would just write the first line of the next chapter to get himself going the next day. What type of things are you working on to make yourself look forward to coming back to it?
I think that for me, it's a matter of certainty and direction, and knowing where the next scene is going. The writing that I most struggle with, and I think this is kind of common with pretty much every job on the planet, is if you don't know kind of what you're doing next, you're much more reluctant to return to it. If something is a kind of real problem, that to me kind of is what I'd be worried about writing, that I need a lot of sort of sitting and staring into space time. Whereas I think if a scene kind of already has some structure and it has some direction, and, you're maybe midway through it, then I think that's when there's real pleasure in writing. When you have the kind of plot and the sort of arc of the scene worked out in your head, and then you're just kind of refining the details and refining the dialogue and sort of pondering how that the plot is going to affect each of the characters. I think that's where you can find a genuine sort of joy and get into that state of kind of and I think this very rarely happens, but where it feels slightly like the characters are writing themselves. I think, that for me, it's having clarity around what will happen next and just enjoying the actual writing of it.
What is a good day for you writing? What are you happy? Is there a word count, for instance? What are you happy with going to bed, having worked on that day?
So if I'm just kind of trying to do a good stretch of writing, I'd say 1,000 words for me is a really good day. Which I think I'm not entirely sure. I think that's relatively low in terms of what some writers manage to sort of get down in a day. But for me, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that the strange thing slightly is, just as an example, yesterday I did absolutely no writing whatsoever. But I did manage to sort of crack a plot sort of hole in terms of what will happen in the next chapter of what I'm currently writing. And so for me, although that it was, it's a day of 0 word count, it felt like a relatively productive, positive day. And I think in a way, sometimes that's the strange thing about writing. I think because at least I feel like my characters and the plot become a bit of an obsession. They tend to be something that I'm thinking about all the time, even if I'm not necessarily writing. Just for example, going for a walk and listening to some music and sort of turning the story round. It's almost like a sort of like worry stone or a stress ball. Sometimes those are the moments when your brain is almost doing something else that I feel you do make these small, strange breakthroughs. So I try not to define it too much by word count. Otherwise, I think I'd probably too often be incredibly disappointed in myself.
Well, how did that... talk me through more of how that happened yesterday. So what are you doing to kind of figure out these plot points? You can't just be sitting there, with a thoughtful tooth, stroking a beard, that kind of thing. And also try and discuss the moment where that realization happened, that eureka of, this is what needs to happen.
Yeah, it's sort of strange to do in a way, because I don't want to sound too sort of pretentious or obscure, but I'm not entirely sure how it does happen. What I would say is I spend quite a lot of time kind of away from my desk, just thinking through the sort of the plot and the plot of my second novel that I'm currently writing. I'm relatively far on with that now, and yeah, there was just this is another novel where I'm pretty certain about how it will end, but I'm not entirely sure about how all the characters will get there. And I think there was a sort of bit of a broken link at present, in the plot and in my planning. And I think I was really just kind of have been thinking about it, to be honest, over the last few months. I often do. I think I mentioned, running in the mornings. I often will use that time as a sort of time just to think through what I'm writing and what will happen next, and just to sort of think about the characters, not necessarily even in a very focused way. It could just be a trigger of like a particular song, or just mulling over what they would say in a particular instance. And I think it's a weird accumulation of that kind of low-level thinking in a way, when your mind is sort of half focused on something and half consumed with the running or with doing something else entirely different, doing the laundry or unstacking the dishwasher. Sometimes I think things just click, and it's maybe a case that your head's been mulling something over in the background. And suddenly it felt like, I think yesterday when I was running, there was just a bit of clarity as to how to bring particular characters together in the sort of finale of the book that I'm working on. So that was it was a productive day despite a despite a pretty depressing word count.
We'll be back with more from Abigail Dean in just a sec. Now, if you're enjoying the show, if you've learned any tips in the past few years and almost 150 episodes now that has really helped the way that you work, that you write, if we've kind of changed the way that you tell your stories, you can help us out for doing that. Just support us over at patreon.com/writers routine. By doing that, you help us carry on bringing you chats with the best authors around as often as we can. I think we've done pretty much every Friday for a year, more or less. Now, maybe I took some time off over Christmas and New Year. Anyway, it's pretty much every Friday you hear from one of the most successful authors around. Now, by pledging to us over on the Patreon, you get a little bit of merch. You get our undying thanks. You also get a chance for your book to sponsor this show. Today, it's Faber Academy. Tomorrow, it could be yours and the book that you wrote during lockdown. To see how that can happen, head to patreon.com/writersroutine and pledge whatever you can. Anything helps. It goes a long way over at patreon.com/writersroutine. Right, let's get back to it then with Abigail Dean talking about her instant Sunday Times best-selling debut, Girl A. In this part of the chat, we talk about what she does to get going at the start of the day, also about working with an editor and how that process was. And we pick things up with the strange working life of an author that's focused on 2 projects. We've spoken about this in the past, and it never ceases to baffle me. You've started book 2. You finished book 1 a year or so ago, but that one is now blowing up. You're doing loads of interviews for it. You've got to focus it. You've got to edit it. How do you crack on with that and plan your year accordingly?
So I've been working on this second novel for just over a year now, kind of probably about 14 months. And some of that time as well has been interspersed with editing Girl A, which is sort of quite all-consuming, I guess, in a way. I think when edits come back, they sort of pull your attention away from whatever you're writing to sort of return to Girl A. So yeah, for me, it's I've been working on it about 14 months, and I have another few months to go. So yeah, I guess in all, it'll probably be about close to 2 years, a year and a half or so. Which is strange because I think Girl A was written in a year, at least the first draft. But during that time, I had the kind of absolute luxury and the privilege, really, to take off 3 months between jobs. So obviously, the routine of having a 3-month period with nothing to do but to write felt very different from sort of balancing writing with work. And it's been a case, I think, of trying to carve out time in a way, through other means, through taking vacation time and through kind of working at weekends. It's been the kind of very strange positive to COVID, I think. For me, as a writer, there has been more time. And it might have been very troubled time, and it might have been pretty kind of murky, slightly low-level worry time. But it has been, in pure sense of hours, there has been more of it. And that, I think, has helped with writing my second novel.
So with the day job then, are you kind of doing your day job and then writing in the evening more or less every day?
Yeah, I guess really it depends completely on the day at work. So there are days when, it's been a relatively quiet day at work. You might be finishing sort of at 5 or 6 p.m. And then it feels like writing is a real kind of possibility. It's something that you're kind of looking forward to at the end of the day. To be completely honest, there are some days, where it's been a really tough day at work, and you're finishing at 8 or 9 p.m. and you've been in negotiations all day, and the thought of kind of having to turn your mind to anything else other than watching Selling Sunset on Netflix is just unbearable. So for me, it really is taking things on a sort of day-by-day basis. Very much dependent on how the work day has gone and sort of what's left of you at the end of it, I think.
So for the debut, for Girl A, talk us through the very first moment that the idea for this story came into your head. What was the light bulb moment? How did it present itself?
It was a bit of a light bulb moment. I still kind of remember relatively vividly sort of going to bed one night, and I often find this is kind of it's both a blessing and a curse, I guess. When we were talking earlier about the sort of low level thought process, where you potentially get some epiphanies or work out some problems in writing. I often find that is just as you're going to sleep, which is not conducive whatsoever for having a good night's sleep. I had been thinking for a very long time about sibling relationships. And I had also been thinking for a very long time about true crime and about the aftermath of what happens when these headlines get recycled, what happens in the days and the months and then the years that follow. And I think those ideas sort of melded together slightly, and I realized that there was a way to write about both of them, to sort of write about the tenderness and the chemistry and the dynamics of a big family and siblings, whilst also kind of exploring that idea of true crime and how it affects different people as they live the rest of their lives.
Very quickly, were you looking for a story to write about? Were you looking for something to have a go at a full novel for? Because you wanted to be a writer, or were these things just coming around your head and you thought the only way you could iron them out and make sense of them is by telling a story?
I'm not entirely sure, is the honest answer. I was definitely thinking about trying to write something more substantive than the sort of short stories and character sketches that I'd written during my 20s. It was a time that I was not particularly happy at work. I was kind of pretty bone tired. But at the same time, I think that it was the case that I thought of this story and had this kind of plan. And I think that then enabled me to justify taking some time off work to actually focus on it. So in terms of a chicken or egg, I'm not entirely sure quite which did happen first. It isn't particularly kind of clear to me looking back, actually.
Talking about the planning of it then, so when you've got that initial idea, when these things are floating around your head, you then need to get a full-on, a plot. There needs to be a story here for you to tell. What happens next? When you've got that initial idea, what do you do before you start writing it?
I like to have a very vague plan, and the way that I do that, to be really kind of specific, is in a document form. I will just set out maybe 2 or 3 pages of what I think will happen, almost in kind of bullet point, very unromantic form. And then I essentially populate that plan with the novel. So I guess from a kind of appearance point of view, what my sort of master document looks like is, halfway through a novel, it will be, sort of 100 pages of writing and, of the actual words. And then below that, there will be the plan of what is still to come and what I've still got to write. And I find that what I can do by working in that kind of format is, if I have an idea when writing one scene about something that needs to happen in a future scene, I can just scroll down and make a note in the plan that sort of sits at the bottom. So by the time I get to that point in the story, I will have the sort of trigger or the reminder or the breadcrumb that needs to be added to that particular scene. So that's exactly how it looks on my Google Docs file.
You spoke about your characters sometimes doing their own thing and writing the story themselves, is how you put it earlier on. With your with the Google Doc, with your plan, how much did you stick to that? How much did your characters take it in a different direction as you got to know them hundreds of pages in?
I think I stuck to it pretty loyally. It is such a kind of minimal plan in some ways that I think it really is sort of the skeleton of the plot. with relatively little in a way, in terms of, the sort of details and nuances of the characters that I think come out as you get to know them better. So in terms of it being a very rough structure, I stuck to it quite faithfully. I think one thing that's strange is obviously, the plan actually gets more detailed as you write more, because I think then you get you kind of get to know the characters more, the plot kind of starts to form in much more detail. And I think that's when you get the opportunity to add to the plan, in terms of it might even be, just a particular line of dialogue that this character would inevitably say at this future moment in time, or it might be a particular element of the house in Girl A, that I wanted to record further down. So oddly, the plan, I think, becomes more fleshed out as the writing kind of continues. And then I think the hope, obviously, is that by the last few thousand words, you kind of then are over the hill, and you kind of, that I guess it really is when, in a way, the characters are pretty known to you, and the conclusion is kind of just waiting to be written. You hear some really interesting exercises around this, right? I've heard about kind of particular questions that you should be able to answer, on your character's behalf, and I actually don't do anything like that. I just spend a lot of time thinking about them, which is probably a much less glamorous or clever way of doing it. But yeah, I think it's sort of a case that I just sort of spend quite a while dwelling on them and on their relationships with each other. As we said before, in that dead time, which is not necessarily writing time, I also do dedicate sort of a lot of time just to kind of thinking about them and letting them develop into these little obsessions that they become.
Earlier, you mentioned when you need inspiration, you will read other people's works, stuff like The Road, Cormac McCarthy. Now, Girl A is a very tense book at points. How much are you thinking about the words that you are writing on the page to convey the atmosphere and the mood? I mean, are you waiting for the exact right word, or are you happy to pick that up later?
I tend to try to write the exact word at the time. I don't think it's the most productive way of writing necessarily, but know that I'm definitely somebody who is sometimes guilty of sitting there for 15 minutes trying to think, what's that specific word that should be used in this sentence. I am slightly guilty of that, I think. And I think I've read since quite a bit of writing advice about, getting a kind of a rough draft down, and then you can refine things. But I find editing to some degree as I go is quite irresistible. I find anyway. So no, I often do kind of return to the paragraph before and faff around for a while before moving on.
If you're editing as you go, how much easier does that make the final edit? I think you were edited by, was it Phoebe Morgan?
It was, yeah.
Yes. So she's an author in her own right, isn't she? She was like one of the first guests on this show, which is very kind of her. So how easy did you make her life, I guess, because she'd been editing as you went? I guess I had edited a lot myself as I went, but then that said, the editing process in total was still kind of 7 or 8 months as a whole. So I actually edited with my agent, Juliet Mushins, for 3 months before we sent Girl A to publishers. So I guess it was a case that I edited, then I edited with Juliet, and then we sent the novel to various publishers, and amazing Phoebe became my editor, and I edited them with Phoebe for a further 4 months.
So I think that probably puts into perspective, the number of times the words were picked over, even though I'd spent sort of like a year faffing with them already. So whether it helped or not, I'm not sure. But I'll never know.
When you're editing for quite a substantial portion of time, is it the same things that people are coming back and saying you need to change? Or, you kind of constantly fixing almost a sinking ship, if you know what I mean? Like you're fixing one problem and then they spot another problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that with Girl A, certainly there were kind of common themes that we were like constantly refining. So I think things that, if I look back at my very first draft, they were kind of major weaknesses. And then it felt like sort of Juliet kind of, patched them up very, very well. And then I think Phoebe, still identified certain holes, and we had to kind of refine those edits further. So I did find that there were things in common that I think you improve, but that it takes kind of really relentless attention to really get right. Whether that will be the case with my next novel, I'm not sure, but I certainly saw a pattern in the edits. I think often it is, similar weaknesses that sort of, the editors pick up on, and that you just have to sort of, keep working on and keep kind of changing those paragraphs, because the cumulative effect is great, even if at the time it feels slightly redundant.
And lastly, Girl A is an instant Sunday Times bestseller. It's so many people are talking about it, and I'm sure it will sell extraordinarily well. As a writer, do you remember the moment where you realise that, oh, hang on, that debut book that I've been dreaming of being massive, that might actually happen? Can you feel the buzz around a story?
It's strange, because I'm still not sure I've entirely accepted that this is happening. But I think that there are moments as you go along, and that there are so many kind of hurdles, I think it feels like, towards publication. But I think that the sort of first realization I had around that this actually could happen, that this could get published, which was already way beyond my wildest dreams. I think my wildest dreams were like to finish the novel, and for like maybe a few family and friends to read it. That was already dream territory. I think that when I sent the novel out to agents, and quite a few of them were interested, at an early stage, that was when I thought, this is now kind of outside of the realm of my family and friends, who might feel some kind of a personal obligation to say it's not awful. I think having that kind of objective and sort of multiple kind of confirmations that this is a story that the agents have loved and have, kind of want to represent. I think those were the moments when I started to think this could happen. It's still a long path. It's still kind of away from getting into publishers' hands. But that was, I think that was where I realized that it was no longer a complete pipe dream.
And that is it for this week's Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Abigail Dean for telling us all about the blistering Girl A. You can grab a copy with the link in the episode notes and over at writersroutine.com as well. Now, this week's episode of the show is supported by Faber Academy. Remember, you can get a 10% discount on any online course or manuscript assessment right the way through until September. You've got a little bit of time to make the most out of this. Use the code WritersRoutine21 when checking out over on their website. Head there now. Go do it. Have a look through the thorough catalogue that they've got. See everything that's on offer. See what they've got online that could help you out. And just pick one. Pick what you fancy. faberacademy.co.uk. Use the code WritersRoutine21 and save yourself 10%. 100%. Now, next week, we're chatting to Shane Dunphy, who used his experience as a child protection officer to write fantastic books. And he's got a new audiobook series out as well. It's a brilliant chat. You can hear all about it next week on Writer's Routine. I will see you then. Bye.